Hello everyone. In this video, we will consider an example of using array with class. We will create an application to have an array of students and display their information. And before that, we have to create a user-defined class named MIT student. In this class, we have the following data field: student ID, student name, and student units, which is an array to store units that a student is studying. For example, a student named ABC may be studying 3 units: IFN 501, 503, and 701. Then we also have a list of units in MIT course. This is to store the collection of all units in the MIT course. The list of all units can be IFN 501, 502, 503, 504, 505, 506, 701, and 702. So this is the list of all units in the MIT course. Then this class also contains a constructor with 3 parameters for student ID, student name, and student units. And make sure that the unit input in here belong to the units course list. That's all we need to do for the example. Now let's analyze what we have inside the class. So you may be already familiar with the data fields like student ID, student name. But for student unit here, this is a data field, but you may see that it's in an array. So an array as a data field. So in C#, you can, each data field for the class can be any data type: integer, string, double, and a data field of a class can be an array as well. So in here we have the third data field of the class is an array. In here, this is also another array. So these are 4 data fields for the class, but these 2 arrays are different. So let us consider the example for our application like this. So assume that we have an array of students, including this is the information of the first student, and this is the information of the second student. This is the information of the third student. So in the first student, you have student ID, student name, and list of unit of that student. In the second student, you also have student ID, student name, and list of unit of that student, and so on for the third and for the fourth student. You will notice that each student will have a separate list of unit, and this is the list of unit for the third student. So each student will have a separate list of units along with the ID and name. But the array of units in here, this is the array of units in the course. We don't need to put this one and save in here and save in here and save in here as each as an element of each object, right? So this array here should not belong to the object. This array here should not belong to the object, but instead it belongs to class. It should belong to class. It should not associate it with its object like ID or name or list of units of that student. So in C#, when we declare a data field for the class, we will have the data field like ID, name, and unit here are non-static data fields, because these data fields associated with object. But this array here will be associated with the class and is used among all objects of the class. Therefore, it belongs to the class. So when you declare this array, it should be a static array. Okay, so let's see how we do it in Visual Studio. Okay, in Visual Studio, you can create a new class MIT student from here. Or, as I told you last time, you can right click on here and choose Art and Class and type in the name in here. And click Art. So I copy this part into here so that easily we can refer what we need to do. Okay, so inside the class MIT student, we first declare data fields for the class. The first data field is int ID. And units, the list of units for a student is a list, an array. So how you declare the array? This is an array of the string. So each element in the array is a string. Therefore, we will write like this. So this is to let the system know that this is a list, an array of strings. Student units. Okay, so all of these three members here, three data fields here are non-started. And then we have another member, which is another data field of this class, which is a started data field, which is a list of units in the course. So how we declare that? Normally, for the status, we normally use as public because it is shared and is used. It depends on situation. You can use that at private as well, but normally it is public because we may use it in another class as well. So in here, I just declare public started string course unit, and in here I will put all of them. Okay, so this is the course unit, which is a started array. Then the next step is to write the constructor of the class. So this class has a constructor with three parameters for student ID, name, and list of units, which is the parameter corresponding to the first three data fields of the class. So how can we write that? So we write the constructor as usual. So we write public and then the name of the class, which is MIT student, and in here we have three parameters. So I have the first parameter for student ID, which is an integer, so ID, and then the second parameter for name, so I use name, and the third parameter for the student units, an array, so I use a string array here and units. Inside the body of the constructor, we will assign the value of the parameter ID to the student ID, name to student name, and unit to student unit. But let's see what we should do in here. So student ID equal ID, student name equal name, and normally we will say student unit equal units. Like that, right? But in here, we should notice that because this is an array, so the behavior of the array different from normal variable. So when we work on the array, make sure that we know that the array is passing by address by reference, not by the value. So in here, there's something that we should notice in here. But in this example, you have to input the value for units before you assign the value for the student units. So in here you have a number of ways you can input the unit right from here, or you can input unit in the main method when you call the constructor to create object. For example, if I want to input the unit from here, so I will call a method named input array, and I pass the units array here, so that I want to input the value for the array units, and then the value from, and then the array units will be assigned to the student units, right? So next step is to write the method input array. So the method input array here, you can declare it as a static array, a static method, depending on how you want to call the methods. So in here I say public static input array, and the parameter is an array, therefore an array of string. Therefore we will use this notation, and then array units. So inside the method body, what we need to do is to input the value for the array unit, and then anytime you input a value, which is a unit cost, make sure that you have to check if the unit is inside the list or not, because if you input a unit not inside the list, so it will be invalid. So so in here you have two things to do: input the list of units for a student, and then anytime you input a unit, you have to check if the unit is inside the list or not. So this is the cost of input array. This is a void method. So first you will prompt user to input number of units for a student, and then you input it at user, and the for loop here to help you input each unit for the student. But while you input, you have to check if the unit is belonging to the list of units cost or not. So in here, check for valid code. Okay, so this code here is to go through each element in the unit in the cost unit array, and check if the unit input equal to any units in the list or not. So you should be able to understand this. This is simple. So this is the method to input the list of units for each student. And in the class MIT student, we may need another method to display the information of a student of an MIT student. So you can write the method in here. So in here we write public void display. So this is a non-static method, and in here we write we display student ID, name, and student ID, student name. In here I want to have some space, so I put 10 here, and then we have to input we have to display the list of units of the student as well. So in here I say list of units of the student, and then because this is an array, the list of units of student is an array, therefore we have to use a loop. You can use a for loop, while loop in here. So I use for each loop, and each element of the unit is a string. So I use a string here in student unit. What I do is to display the value of the unit, but in here we put a string format here. So this method here to display the information of a student. Okay, so this is the class MIT student we have done. So in here you can extend this class by adding some properties in this class, or you can add in some more constructor. Okay, that is your job, your task to do. So in the program.cs file, in the main method, we start to use the class. The first step is to because the requirement in this application is to create an array of MIT students and display the information of that of the students. So what we want to do here, to create an array of objects MIT student. But before doing that, we don't know how many students that you want to create, how many student objects that we want to create for the array. So normally you can just randomly choose a number as the size for the array, but you can require user to input the value as well. For example, in here, to declare an array of MIT student, so you will write like this, start with the name of the class, and because we are declaring an array, so we put the square brackets there and then the name of the array. So I say student list and then equal new MIT student, and in here should be the size of the array, for example 10 or 100 or whatever, right? But in here I want to input this value, so I put before I declare this array, I want to input the value for the size of the array first. So I say input number of student, and then in here we declare a variable student num, and I use that variable in here. Student num equal int pass read line. Okay, or you can use convert, or in here if in here you can even use in try pass to make sure that the value user input in here is a number, is an integer. And then after we input the value for student number, we use this value here at the size of the array. So that's how we declare the array of the MIT student for the application. So next step is to use the constructor to create a student object, an MIT student object. I will demonstrate how to create a student object first, and after that a list of student object. Create an object. So if you use the constructor here with 3 parameters, this one. If you use this one to create an object, for example, if I want to create an object and I say a student, the name of the object, and then equal new, should be like this, right? Of course, we don't have the data type there. We just have ID, we just have name, and we just have a list of unit. So if you want to use this constructor here, make sure that we have the ID, we have the name, and we have the list of unit. So in here we can input for ID, for name, and for list of units in here. So how can we do that? First, we input the name. Name for student. And in here we have to declare some variable, name, in ID, string name, and in here input the name, so name equal read line because it is a string. Okay, and in here, before input name, we have to input ID, and ID here equal in pass read line. Okay, so we use that ID, we use that name to pass into the constructor here. So how about the unit? For the unit, because in the class, in the constructor already called the method to input the value for the units. So what we need to do in here is declare an array. So in here I will declare an array of unit from here, string units equal new string, and maybe I will use a random number 10. Okay, so if I run this, it should ask me first the ID number for the student, and then the name for the student, and then it's create an array, an empty array. Then it called this constructor. In this one, in this constructor with 3 parameters here, it will assign the value of ID to the student ID, name to the student name, and then it's called the method input array to input the value for the array units, and then this array will be assigned to the student unit. Okay, after that, if we want to display the information of the student, then we will call the method display to display, because that method is non-static, so we have to call the method via the name of object. So like this. Okay, so in here we don't need this one at the moment, so maybe I will comment it. Okay, so if I input ID 112 and I input the name Sophie, and then number of unit for the student. So this is the method input array. Before input is asked how many units that you want to input for this student. For example, I input 2, and then I input IFN 501, and then if I input IFN 777, it will say this is an incorrect code, and I input again IFN 502. So, and then this is the method display. It display the information of the student that we have just inputted. So you have, this is the ID, the name, and the list of unit of the student is like that. Okay, so now we will extend this code so that we can create a list of students. So in here, I will uncomment this part. So after you have the number of the students in this array and you create a list, now you will repeat it. We will loop these type of things a number of times depending on how many students there. So I will put this thing inside a loop body. So in here I will say create an array of objects. Okay, so how can we do that? We will need to use a loop. So I use a for loop, and then in here I say in I or x, whatever. So I equals 0, I smaller than student list dot length, or you can even use in student number as well, because the student number here is the length of the array, and then I plus plus, and then inside the body I put everything in here. So this code here is inside the body, but we need to change a little bit. So I say input ID for student, input name for student, and then input ID, input name, and then I call this constructor to create an object, and then we display it, right? But because this is an array, so we have to put this one into the array. So we say our array name student list. So I say student list I equal the value of the A student here. Okay, so by making like this, the element id of the array will be the information of a student object in here. So for the display here, you can display right here on, or normally people will just input all students information and then display after that. So after you input all information of the student, you will use another loop to display the information. So I say list of all students. So I put some enter here to make a new line here, and then we will need to use a loop as well. So what in here is to call each element of the array. Each element of the array here is an object, right? So and because it's an object, so of the MIT student class, therefore we have the method display here to use. So I call the method display. So this loop will go through each element of the array and call the method display to display the information of each element of the array, which is information of each student. So if you run this code, it will run in correctly. But before that, I want to write some more so that it look better. So in here I say write line, and I say input information for student 0, and in here I say I plus 1, so that we know we are inputting the information for the first student, for the second student, and so on. Okay, so if we run this, for example, I input 2 students. So this is the information for the first student, and the ID for the student, for example, 901, and the name, and input the number of units for the student, maybe 2, and I input IFN 501, IFN 502, and then input information for student 2. So ID, for example, 903. So for the list of units, I input 3, IFN 503, IFN 505, and IFN 701. And after inputting, it will display the list of all units in here, all students, and the list of all units of that student in here. Okay, so you will look at this code, and you can make some extension on this code to understand more about how to use array as a data field of the class. There are 2 types of arrays there. It can be static or non-static. Similar to normal data field can be static or non-static as well. And how to use an array of objects in the application.